Freight Efficiency with NACFE's Mike Roth and friends.
In episode 101, we're joined by Ben Sharpe. He's a senior researcher at Atlas Public Policy, where we talk about the importance of people in the environmental community and policy space to have a real connection to the industry. He also shares why he has dedicated a big part of his career to trucking, and he shares his thoughts on policy and the transformation of the trucking industry. He also provides insights into how to navigate the changes coming in trucking. Today we have joining us Ben Sharpe. Ben and I go back a few years, and we'll get into that here in just a second. He's a senior researcher at Atlas Public Policy. Excited to chat with you today, Ben. Good to have you on.
Yeah, thanks so much, Mike. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with you.
Do you remember how we met, Ben?
I remember that it was around 2010, and I was with the International Council on Clean Transportation, ICCT at the time. I was just kind of starting to work on fuel efficiency with ICCT, and my boss at the time, Fanta, she was convening lots of different folks as people were thinking and doing a lot of work to support the federal agencies, which were working on the first ever fuel efficiency and greenhouse gas regulation for heavy duty vehicles. And I want to say that she brought together that there was like an in-person meeting at our office in San Francisco. And I recall us meeting at that event.
You and I worked on one of the very first NACFE reports. I think we're at like 80 or 90 reports now over the 15 years. But the first one was a barriers to adoption of fuel economy technologies in North America. I looked back getting ready for this, Ben. We published it in July of 2013. So we did some. That was I think our first real work together. Remember that?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. That's easily one of the most rewarding and actually fun projects that I've ever worked on in my career, and look back on it fondly for sure. I think the word groundbreaking is probably overused sometimes, but I really do think that piece really stands up in terms of just being a really trailblazing piece in terms of not only were we able to talk to just a really wide range of stakeholders, from fleets to OEMs to shippers to just kind of other experts in the field, but what I think was the coolest aspect about that work is I think we got almost like 1,800 survey responses from owner operators and small fleets.
We did, yeah.
Which has to be a record in this space. And the connection you had with Kevin Rutherford of Let's Truck and his radio program and just getting access to his audience was really just a game changer. And so to get insights from so many owner operators, small fleets, just such a cool project to be able to get those responses, to see how they compared to the other fleets.
Working on that with you probably helped me figure out with the team at NACFE, how we should go about our work. What's important to these customers? What's important to learn about the technologies? The fleet fuel study came around a few years later, where we used a lot of those same technologies, and we still do it to this day in publishing a report on adoption. So before we go any farther, Ben, what tell us about yourself, a little about your career, and I've known you 15 years, and you're continuing to work in trucking. So why have you decided to make this a big part of your career?
My path to the transportation world was a little bit circuitous. I'm a civil engineer by training, and coming out of college, I was really kind of seeking an adventure and a chance to live abroad. So I ended up signing on to work for a multinational oil field services company. And my first assignment was out in Indonesia, which was really thrilling for a young 22-year-old kid fresh out of school. So that was something that I really just valued from multiple perspectives, culturally, just immersing in a completely different way of living. But in terms of like what I was working on, I was out in the oil fields, working on cleaning up these wells. And the particular division that I was in is called the coil tubing division. And we had these really big rigs, these trucks that had these really massive pieces of equipment on it and a big operating station. And it was really at that point I just kind of fell in love with heavy equipment. I certainly was not a gearhead, not a mechanic by training, but came to really appreciate those big trucks and all the diverse things that they could do. And so, so when the opportunity presented itself to go back to grad school, I just kind of immediately just kind of gravitated towards trucks and heavy equipment. And so that was kind of my origin story and kind of getting into the heavy duty world. And but yeah, what makes me tick, Mike? I think that the opportunity to work on like really difficult issues and questions is just super appealing to me. And I think on the transportation world, there's perhaps no bigger quandary that we're facing in terms of how do we completely revolutionize the way that we travel in terms of fuel sources and so many other things, automation, et cetera. So to kind of be at the center of this really massive transition is really thrilling.
Yeah, that's really and that's a common theme. We when we went out, you were one of the 122 people we interviewed during Run on Less Electric Depot. You joined us at Sacramento with the Tesla Semi, and as we did those visits, I did 7 of the 10. The rest of the NACFE team were with me on some of them and did some others. The people who are working on, in this case, electric trucks, or it could be just this whole movement to zero emission freight movement or near zero emission freight movement. Um, we understand how big of a transformation this is going to be. Yet we come to work and we get passionate and move forward. So there's a lot of smart people. You're one of them who are part of all this, but there's not a frustration amongst it all, and we're not naive to it. That's very, very fun and fascinating. I think I'm finding that gives me a lot of hope that we're going to get there, maybe even faster than we think.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. Like it's obviously an unprecedented transition, but the number of just really smart and engaged and passionate and optimistic people that I've met and continue to meet is really pretty humbling.
And our sport supported financially. I mean, there's a ton of investment going in to all of this. I mean, tons of investment going into this. So, all right. So tell us about Atlas Public Policy. You've been there, I don't know, a couple years, maybe less. I don't. Yeah, time flies. But tell us about the organization and what attracted you, and kind of what you're excited about working on with them.
So Atlas Public Policy, we're a we're a consultant group, and we provide businesses, governments, and organizations with tools and dashboards and research, mainly so that they can make more informed decisions that serve the public interest. So we're a small, we've about 20 people, but we like to think that we punch above our weight. The primary sectors that we work in are transportation, primarily focused around electrification. We also do work in buildings, water, and just climate policy tracking. So Atlas was founded in 2015 by Nick Nigro, and at the time he was a one-man shop. But I think it's really, really cool that Nick was able to carve out a niche for himself and for Atlas as kind of a hybrid blend between consultant / NGO / tech company. But yeah, so over the past 9 years, Atlas has grown. As I mentioned, we're about 20 folks. And I was really excited to join the team earlier this year, back in February. But yeah, no, it's a really, I think, a fun transition for me, being with ICCT for nearly 15 years. The opportunity to come to Atlas was really exciting, not only to continue to work in the transportation electrification space, but the opportunity to work at it from a different angle,
Yeah.
doing more kind of domestic focused work. I've certainly learned a great deal, particularly as it relates to the electric utilities and charging infrastructure and the like.
Let's just stick with electric trucks for a little bit. Whether it was at ICCT or now at Atlas, what are some things you think that maybe others don't about fleets going from diesel to electric, or even manufacturers building electric trucks versus diesel trucks or whatever. I mean, what's some insights do you feel like maybe you have that when you watch the whole industry we don't have in general?
Well, that's a tough question, Mike, because I don't really feel that I'm going to say anything really groundbreaking or that you haven't really heard before. Um, but I think it continues to be something that I think about, which is that uh, for nearly the entire existence of the trucking sector and the electric power sector, they've mostly been just kind of on parallel tracks and not really interfacing very much.
Yeah.
And it's been really fascinating over the past few years to kind of see the two worlds starting to mingle and collide. Um, and it's just really interesting. And I forget who it was, and maybe it was Dave Schaller, but he kind of made the analogy to maybe to dating, to that process of to getting to know one another. It can be awkward. Sometimes we're saying the wrong things. But yeah, I think we can't overstate the importance of for each of the different groups to come at this from a place of humility and curiosity.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, so you can't go outside and in 30 seconds you're either going to see a truck and you're going to see electricity infrastructure. You're going to see part of the grid, right? You're going to see the what I call sometimes the edge of the grid, right? Getting the power to homes, to businesses, and so forth. And they're both well over 100 years old, but yet they haven't had to coexist at all until now. I mean, straight, just sort of a little bit, but not very much at all. And now we're asking them, these two behemoth, old school, let's maybe call it, things, to intimately work together. And I said earlier that I got a lot of hope. When I lose hope for even a little bit of time, it's when I start thinking about how unique all these trucking fleets are and how unique the various different utilities are. So there's this like a saying going around the industry that each fleet's a snowflake and so is each utility. And so we're not gonna learn from project one in Sacramento, and we're not gonna be able to apply that in Kansas City. Well, there is going to be some that we're going to be able to apply learnings, but yeah, that's at the heart of the challenge, I think. And you're bringing it up, and I think it's really, really a good point.
Yeah, no, and that's why I think, just to go back to my admiration for NACFE, I really love your guys' model of being able to openly and honestly just communicate about the wins and losses and what people are learning on the ground. I think it's just so critically important for technology and a systems as kind of revolutionary as electric trucks, to be able to get these early lessons and best practices and all these videos and stories from drivers and fleets. It's really, really cool to be able to have a group that's just laser focused on making sure that kind of in the early days of this transition, as much information is getting out there as possible that's going to help companies and stakeholders make good decisions around this new technology.
Yeah, so I know you work on the technology side quite a bit in your efforts, but if you don't mind, let me ask you about policies, regulations. They're a big part of this transformation, whether some people would say whether we like it or not. But any thoughts on trucking policy, whether it be what is a good policy approach, or maybe even some thoughts on national versus state versus local. But given your time at ICCT and now at Atlas, tell us something about policy that you've learned or is of interest.
Just to pick a particular issue that we're thinking a lot about is this whole question of publicly available or semi-publicly available charging for big rigs. And what are some of the policies that are going to be able to support those investments, right? Because each of these charging stations for these heavy trucks is going to be like a stadium's worth of electricity at one point. So it's a really, really complicated, and it's a big deal to be able to plan and design and develop these projects. And certainly at this juncture in time, it's a fairly risky investment. So we're trying to get a lot smarter on what are the specific policies like for those actual truck specific stations that are going to help to make those investments more palatable. We've had some initial conversations with a range of different groups. What are the incentive programs and structures? How do you design those in a way that you can make it pencil out more easily for those station owners and operators? How are these charging stations for trucks? How are they going to be different and similar to our conventional diesel truck stops? So yeah, I think that there's so many questions that are out there about these public stations that by and large are just starting to be opened in a couple of different places in the country. But I think making the finances make sense, getting to a place where these can be sustainable businesses without incentives longer term is obviously the end goal. And there's definitely a role for policy, particularly in the early days. But how do you taper those policies and incentives in a way that makes sense, given so much uncertainty with the market? Is there going to be a viable market for these public stations? If so, how often are they going to be used? Utilization factor, or how often are these chargers going to be in use? That's a huge part of the financial calculus. And it's not a complete guess, but there's a lot of unknowns as to how these stations would actually be used. So that's one of the policy questions that we're grappling with. But there's just so many out there in this space, and just to pick that one. But
yeah, I get it. Another one that's not too far away from that is, how do we help utilities make investments in the feeder lines or the transmission lines to areas that have high levels of freight and truck traffic and so forth? So where do we put the truck stops or electric charging hubs or stations, and how do we get the power to those, are both really interesting challenges that isn't one of those things you think a lot about when you're scaling one or two trucks here and there. But when we get into 10, 15, 20, 100, 200 trucks in a particular area, then we're going to need that. It all becomes really a huge need and necessity.
yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned earlier about the utility space being a 100-year-old industry. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of inevitable for any company or sector that's had so much history, that it can be really difficult to change the momentum of how they've done things for so long, for decades. And you mentioned getting added capacity, new infrastructure, setting up these charging stations. But there's a pretty established way that utilities have thought about providing new service for many, many years. And I think now we're asking utilities to think in different ways in terms of, well, we know that there's going to be a huge demand in this particular location. Let's go ahead and proactively build out that infrastructure because we know that this is like a trucking hotspot, for example.
Yeah. The old supply and demand equation still lives, right? So
Sure.
we're seeing the demand for an old commodity, electricity, that's jumping through the roof, and so people will figure it out. Maybe not as quick as we want, but they'll figure it out. Hey, Ben, we always run out of time quickly. As we close, give us some insight on just how do you navigate all this. I mean, we talked about in this half hour, we talked about times where we're really hopeful and times where we're kind of in despair over this whole challenge. How do you get through it, or how do you suggest we get through it?
Yeah, Mike. Well, I really love your guys' term, messy middle. And I really think that that's perfect, because this is really complicated stuff. Not only from a technology perspective, but just from a human just kind of human behavior and cultural and political forces are just really fascinating to me. And just to kind of go back to kind of the earlier days of NACFE, I know that you remember those charts that you used to do with the adoption rates across several dozen technologies. And I'll never forget those charts because across a range of different technologies, there's never consensus about the value of that technology and how quickly the overall sector should adopt that technology. And these we're talking about, I don't want to say vanilla technologies, but much more straightforward things like better tires or side skirts. So thinking about just how diverse the range of perspectives were just for those kind of more simple technologies. If we think about electrification and all the complexity and cost and technology that's a change, I think that we have to approach this from a place of humility, curiosity, compassion, and just be willing to, perhaps it's cliche, but just being willing to learn and have dialogue. And I'm of the opinion that it's really hard to change somebody's mind by yelling at them or a command and control approach. And I'm much more from a place of meeting people where they're at, understanding that everybody has a valid perspective. Because at the end of the day, this is going to take a Manhattan Project level of coordination and cooperation across a range of different sectors. We talked about trucking in the utility space, but it includes the policy sector as well. And so I really think that there's no way around just us all having to just be open about what we know and don't know.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is kind of hold on loosely to what we know. When we learn something different and want to change our approach, then go fast until we go through that cycle again. Just keep going fast. I've never been a fan of fail fast. That it just never made a lot of sense to me. Well, maybe that's what we're talking about here. Maybe it's not failing. Maybe it's just learn, adapt, change, do that whole thing fast, and then we'll get there. So, hey, Ben, thanks so much. This time together has made me think, and that's a good thing.
No, absolutely, Mike. This was a real pleasure. I'm really excited to keep working together. And so thank you again. It means a lot.
The best to you, Ben.
All right. Thanks.
Freight Efficiency with NACFE's Mike Rosen Friends.